Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Cars Reading Skills workshop as part of your Jack Westin MCAT podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about the Jack Westin daily passage called Economic Models. This is the passage from November 26th. But again, as always, if you are not listening to this episode on November 26th, you could always find the link to complete this passage in the caption or the description of this episode. Now, Jack, this episode I feel like is going to be a fun one, not just because we've got a holiday weekend coming up. Probably a lot of people are going to be listening to this while stuffing their faces with food or maybe spending some time with family.
Right.
Um, it's exciting. Do you have anything fun going on for the holidays?
Just family, which I'm like, always excited for. It's always great to see family. But yeah, I mean, I think this kind of passage is actually great to do when you're done eating or before you eat.
Yeah, maybe
Give
before.
you an appetite, right?
Yeah.
These kind of economic passages I feel like are hard for students because we're not used to reading this stuff and talking about it. And
Yeah.
so I'm excited to go into it. You may learn something new that you could talk to your uncle about, right? Around Thanksgiving
Yeah.
table. But I think the key here is just have an open mind and really figure out what the author wants to convey. That's really the key. Every paragraph you read, what is the author's message? What is the author trying to convey?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's so funny. Yeah, this might give you more information to bring to the table on Thanksgiving. Um, yeah, and it's a really cool passage. I feel like I expected it to be really boring. I'm not the biggest fan of economics in general, but it's actually a really fun read. So I'm excited to share with our listeners. So, in case this is anyone's first Cars Reading Skills workshop, know that we're going to go through each paragraph and we'll go through sentence by sentence and kind of talk about what the important takeaways are when it comes to the author's arguments. So, let's go ahead. We'll hop in with sentence one of paragraph one. It says, it is hard to find a chink of light in the financial gloom looming over the US. Okay, so wow, first sentence, and we already paint a pretty significant picture, right? We're talking about financial gloom, but this sentence to me, Jack, is just like dripping with tone. This word choice is it's pretty extreme. It's pretty intentional. A
Right.
chink of light. We're talking about the looming over the US, the financial gloom. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, it seems.
Right. It's hard to find any light, right? So,
Mhm.
and it's gloomy, right? Looming over, so it feels like it's like daunting. It's casting over us.
Mhm.
So, yeah, it definitely seems negative. And we know that it's saying financial. So there's some sort of maybe some sort of financial problem, some sort of economic depression, recession, something going on that's bad for the economy
Yeah.
in the US specifically. So it kind of establishes where what we're talking about, where we're talking about it. It gives us a lot of information for sure.
Yeah. There's financial gloom in the US, and it seems pretty bad, according to the author's tone. Okay, let's see what else we get in this paragraph. So last week, US federal regulators seized control of IndyMac, one of the nation's largest savings banks, after a crippling run on its deposits. Okay, so this sounds more like details, probably of why we have financial gloom. So they're seizing savings banks. Um, and that word crippling, I feel like, again, when I'm looking at tone, I'm looking at word choice. Like, what are the words that don't have to be there, but they're choosing to include them anyways? A lot of adjectives, a lot of adverbs. Okay, so this crippling run on its deposits, these banks, this run on the deposits is crippling. So again, it's this word choice is making it seem like this financial situation is really bad. To me,
Yeah,
this is a detail, but
right. Like I don't exactly know what's going on, right? Like it's not giving me a lot of info. I all I know is that there is a bank that seems to be struggling and the US regulators are seizing control over it.
yeah.
I mean, why would like that's kind of weird. Why would the government seize control of a bank, of a
Mhm.
savings bank? So there's obviously some sort of financial mess going on, right? the whole crippling run on its deposits. I don't think like you don't have to be a a finance person to really understand that, but at the same time, I don't think you're responsible for that. I think all you need to know is, look, there's some financial problems, and a bank called IndyMac is currently having problems to the point where the US government, federal government, has to step in.
Absolutely. Yeah. Then the government announced plans to inject billions into the nation's two largest mortgage finance companies amid panic over their massive debts and dwindling reserves. Okay, so we now get the next step. The government seized control of IndyMac. Now they're also injecting money into other things. Again, to me, we're still describing the financial gloom. I don't think, like you said, you're really responsible for this information, this detail, but it sounds like this financial gloom has something to do with, or has created perhaps some changes in government and their oversight with this stuff. And again, the language, panic, massive debts, dwindling reserves. It's not a good picture, is what I'm getting. Pretty gloomy situation.
Right. Same consistent with what we've been talking about, the government stepping in, injecting billions, saving these, I guess, finance companies, these mortgage finance companies, I guess they're banks, from their massive debts and dwindling reserves. I mean, if you're a bank, you shouldn't have that much debt. You shouldn't have that much, dwindling reserves. You should have a lot of reserves. So this is consistent with this idea that there is some sort of financial problem.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a few years ago, we were told that the unprecedented sophistication of modern financial engineering had systematically reduced market risks, making events of this kind all but impossible. So it sounds like this is unexpected, right? The author's using we, like we were told, probably as a society, we were told that this shouldn't happen. Clearly, it is happening, and the author's been very descriptive about the fact it is happening. This financial gloom is a problem. It sounds like this is unexpected. I'm curious about why. The next sentence, and it's the last of the past or paragraph, just says, "So what happened?" My brain is already imagining, right? So what happened? Why? If this is impossible or all but impossible, then why is it happening? Okay. Um, So the author's kind of prompting that question before they even officially state it. But it sounds like, really, to me, Jack, the purpose of this paragraph is really just to set up that there are financial problems and they're not expected. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I don't sense any particular argument in this paragraph. It's just setting up the scenery here, right? It's just setting up, okay, what are we like what's going on? It's like the whole thing is consistent with this idea that there's financial collapse, imminent financial ruin, some sort of financial problem, right? And it does mention that, hey, there should have been some sort of sophisticated financial engineering that could reduce this problem from happening, but it still happened, right? There's some sort of mechanism in place to help prevent such a thing from occurring, but it did happen. So again, this paragraph is important because we now know what we're talking about throughout the entire passage. We're going to talk about finances, the economy. We're talking about the US. We're not only talking about the US economy, we're talking about how it's not doing well, right? And now it's kind of setting us up as to understanding why it might not be doing well or what could be leading to this problem, right? So that's the sense I get. And yeah, I'm excited to read the next paragraph to understand what happened here. And if anyone remembers this happened back in 2008. You may remember it, you may not. This was a big deal back then. I vividly remember it. So I do have some opinions about it, some bias towards this, right? This economic collapse that happened way back when. But I'm not trying to bring that into the read, right? When I'm reading this, I'm just pretending like I never knew about it and I'm just figuring out what the author's points of views are, right? And so if you did remember this back when this happened, great, but don't like inject, or I'm using the words from the passage, don't bring in your own opinions about it.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's harder the closer it gets to your own lived experience.
Right.
All right, paragraph 2, it says, in part, it is a rerun of an old story, a tale of greed and lax oversight, fueling a wave of speculative investment that was both unrealistic and unsustainable. Okay, so we're saying that this happened because of greed and lax oversight, which probably means not much oversight, if I had to guess, right? But I think greed is very clear. The greed caused this. Okay. The greed caused the investments that were unrealistic and unsustainable, and that caused the financial situation, right? It all comes back to the greed.
Right. We don't understand exactly what happened that was greedy, right? Maybe they gave too much money away. Maybe they were making bad financial decisions some way or another to make more money, right? Greed is obvious. Greed means I want more, right? And I'm not happy with what I have. And so that's enough. That idea that's an argument, right? Like the author is saying the reason why all this stuff happened is because of greed. Maybe it happened for another reason, and the author is not even, pointing that out. Maybe it happened because the system was set up improperly, right? Maybe it happened because we didn't have a good check and balance system in place to really monitor things. Who knows, right? Like this is something as complex as this is almost impossible to really determine why something happened, but the author can make their own conclusion, and the author has made their conclusion. The author is saying it's greed. So, okay, all right, that's good to know.
Such is also to blame for the 1990s dot-com bubble and the 17th century, in quotes, tulip mania. I don't know what tulip mania is, but now I'm really curious. This is one of the things that I love about cars is sometimes you read things, you're like, what could that possibly be about? Right? Like it makes me curious about things I would never otherwise hear. That being said, in the context of this argument, we're stating that greed is the cause of some sort of financial problem. Okay, so we're saying this is also to blame for the dot com and tulip mania. Probably this is I don't want to call it a throwaway sentence, but probably this is just helping us believe that greed could really cause this. They're not
Right.
expanding that much on either one of these. Probably they're just using it to strengthen the idea that greed could be responsible for financial problems.
Yeah, it seems like a common theme if it's happened before with this other dot-com bubble and this tulip mania, which I'm also curious about, which after we read this, I'm going to go on ChatGPT and ask a million questions about. So, okay,
Yeah, for
great.
real. Okay, house prices, as anyone with any historical knowledge could tell you, do not always go up, yet many seem to have bought into the idea that they would. Okay, so now we're talking about house prices, which may have contributed to this financial gloom in some way. But again, just for anyone listening, I want to use this passage to really indicate what tone looks like. Okay, because this they could have just house price they could have said house prices don't always go up. But they said house prices, as anyone with any historical knowledge could tell you, do not always go up. You see how that phrase interjected in there, it doesn't actually change the argument. House prices don't always go up, right? Or it doesn't change the meaning of the sentence. And yet the author's basically saying this is really obvious. Okay, it's really obvious. They're injecting their own not official argument, which is really what they are trying to convince you of, but it's their attitude towards what they're telling you. It's their attitude towards what they're trying to convince you of. And it seems like the author's pretty clear about how they feel about this topic. So I always like looking at that. Look basically for the words and phrases that don't have to be there in order to carry the same meaning. That's how I like to look at tone. So kind of
I
cool.
love that. I love that. I mean, you could definitely tell there's an attitude here, right? Um, and also imagine someone talking to you like this.
Yeah.
Right? Like if someone talked to you like this, how would they convey the sentence? It would definitely have passion. It would definitely have, I don't know if the right word is resentment or if the right word is annoyance, right? Like
Yeah.
they would feel a little bothered by what's going on, right? Based on how they're talking about it. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah. All right, final sentence here in P2. It says, some got rich by perpetuating that notion and playing the market with other people's money. Yeah, I do sense some resentment here, Jack. I feel like that's not a bad word here. Because the author's being very clear about how bad this problem is with those tone heavy words in P1. And then P2, it sounds like, again, this problem should be clear. Anyone with historical knowledge should be able to say that this is a problem. And, they're getting rich playing with other people's money. There is an air of almost frustration, a little bit of resentment, maybe a little, irritation, something.
Yeah, yeah. Frustration, irritation, right. So big idea, what? This idea that greed caused the economic crisis, right?
Yeah,
Economic problems. I think that's really the only thing they're talking about here. And it's actually our first argument, right?
yeah,
The idea that there was an economic crisis, the point that the author made in the first paragraph that there is an economic crisis is not really an argument, right? Just saying that, oh, look, there's problems with the US economy. That could be like the factual. If stock markets are low or down, people are not buying houses, like you can measure that, right? So it's not necessarily an argument there. But the argument about why it might have happened, it's clear. It's evident in the second paragraph. We need to keep track of that.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, P3. The crisis also seems to have been worsened by a woefully archaic theoretical understanding of markets. All right, so here we get even more tone heavy words. Woefully archaic, right? These basically the understanding of markets is contributing to. That's really what you need to understand. Okay. There's something about the way we understand markets that's contributing to this problem. But if you're comfortable with some of this language, which maybe not everyone is, you're also getting a lot of tone, right? Woefully is like dreadfully or sad, like it's full of woe. It's not a good thing. And archaic means basically ancient, right?
Ancient.
It's
Yeah.
like archaeology, right? So it's like that woefully archaic. Again, if that goes over your head, I think it is harder to understand for most students, but if you are clued into it, it's making this tone even more clear. Okay, something about the understanding of the markets is the problem, but it's really fun. This passage is giving us a lot of very strong tone words, which I always like to point out because it's hard to find those in most passages.
Right. Yeah. And it says it's worsened by archaic theoretical understanding of markets. So it's not that greed is not a contributing factor. It's that there may be another factor, right? This other factor is we're not really understanding the understanding of the markets, right? We're using an old understanding, a very old, ancient understanding that is hurting our chances of resolving it, or maybe it's actually leading to more problems for it.
Yeah.
Okay.
In assessing market risks, regulators still rely on what is called, quote, equilibrium theory, whose conceptual roots lie in 19th century physics. I know some of our listeners that are MCAT students are like, wait, 19th century physics has something to do with equilibrium. Don't worry about it. Right? It's not the ChemPhys section. And there's not really a lot of history in the ChemPhys section anyways. Um, but it's basically saying we have an issue because we use equilibrium theory, is kind of what it sounds like. We're saying we still rely on this and its roots are in 19th century. Probably this is the theoretical understanding of markets that made things worse. Okay.
Right.
All we are really getting is that it's called equilibrium theory.
That's it.
That's it. Okay. This holds that market behavior reflects a balance between forces. Okay, this is maybe giving us a little bit more, but I think it's pretty abstract. Okay, we're talking about markets and there's some sort of balance, but I don't know what these forces are and I don't know how they're in balance. So I feel like, equilibrium having to do with balance is not it's not a huge surprise, but I don't have any clarity on what this actually means yet. So I would keep reading just until things become a little more clear. Market values change, the theory says, only in response to external influences. New information about a company, for example, or a real change in the housing supply. Okay, I don't know about you, Jack. This one feels a little bit more clear, right? It's market is changing because of external influences only. Okay. Only is a pretty strong, very clear, and definitive word. This is the only thing that will change market values is some external influences. And they even gave us an example. Okay. So it's in response to something else. That's basically the idea.
Yeah, yeah, I mean that's it. I mean, just this idea of external. But when I read this, I'm thinking, what does external really mean? And
Yeah.
I don't feel like the example is really that clear. Even though they say it's an example, is it really an example? For me, an example is something that's very vivid, very clear, very obvious. They explain it really well. I mean, they're kind of listing the things that might be external influences, like new information about a company, like the real change in the housing supply, etc., like that, something like that. But again, like it's not giving me enough information to really understand it to the extent that I want, but I may not need it, right? There's a difference between needing something and wanting something. I want more information on what is an external influence, but I don't need it to answer these questions. I just need to understand that this old theory is tied to only, like you said, that word is really important, only external influences. Now, I hope that whatever example they give us is enough to help us understand it. And I think to some extent it does, right? We know it's some external influence, something that is not necessarily internal, right? And so if you can understand that concept of external versus internal, even if you don't know where to draw the line between external and internal, or what defines external, what defines internal, you'll be okay. You'll be totally fine. But I
Yeah.
think that this is a great way of helping us understand the theory. The theory is it's all external, which obviously the author does not agree with, right? Because of the way the author has been presenting it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. This is not really a Jack Weston example. It says, for example, but our strategies go a little deeper, which is always helpful for students. Okay, last sentence of P3. Beyond these forces, markets have no real internal dynamics of their own. Okay, and I see a semicolon. Just, I'm going to pause and reflect. Okay, no internal dynamics. So we're only external. Okay, the only things that change markets are the stuff on the outside. Okay, that's just reinforcing that same sentence before, right? There's no internal dynamics, it's all external. And then after the semicolon, it says those who work in markets do not affect market values. So, okay, if the internal has no impact on markets and those who work in markets don't affect markets, that's probably what they mean by internal dynamics. Basically, the people that work in it don't change things. That makes sense because they only change, according to equilibrium theory, in response to external influences.
That makes sense now. I get internal now, right? Internal means someone who's working in the markets, right? Like the author made that pretty clear. So that helps.
Yeah, it almost feels like insider trading or something.
Right. Yeah.
The people who work in markets, I would think my brain would tell me that they maybe could affect market values. I'm not going to bring that here. Although, like you mentioned, it does sound like tone-wise, the author doesn't necessarily agree with equilibrium theory.
Well, I mean, the author is blaming equilibrium theory on on this economic crisis. Like the economic crisis occurred because, in part, the equilibrium theory, and the author even said it's archaic.
Yeah,
Like something archaic is not something we want to use, right? Like if
yeah,
I say typewriters are archaic, no one's like that basically means I don't want to use it or it's not useful anymore, right? It's
yeah.
obsolete. And
It's
so
got a
maybe
negative connotation for sure.
yeah, I mean yeah, it has a negative connotation, especially in this context. I could say typewriters are archaic, but I could actually be a fan of typewriters, right? I could, even though saying it's archaic, meaning it doesn't have any usefulness in today's society, I could still love it. But the way the author has casted blame on on this economic crisis due to the theory, it's obvious the author doesn't like this theory and thinks that we need to change it.
Agreed. All right, let's look at P4. It says, given how rumors drive markets up and down, and the way investors flock like sheep and follow the words of various gurus, this is clearly unrealistic. Okay, so right there, it's unrealistic. Boom. Equilibrium theory is unrealistic. They're using, again, pretty tone heavy language. So rumors are driving things up and down. Investors flock like sheep and follow gurus, right? Like they're giving context, but the bottom line, most important little phrase is this is clearly unrealistic. We already anticipated that, but there it is out in the open. The author does not believe equilibrium theory has a lot of value. All right. Only a few researchers have actually tried to build new foundations and move beyond the restrictions of equilibrium thinking. So, right there as well, this is equilibrium thinking is a restriction. But now we're talking about possibly some other ideas. Doesn't sound like there are a lot of other ideas, but if I know the author doesn't believe in the value of equilibrium thinking, I'm curious, right? They seem to be transitioning to alternative viewpoints, and I'm excited to see what they get into because hopefully it'll be something they do agree with. Okay, they have pioneered computer models that mimic markets by simulating the behavior of individuals, banks, hedge funds, and other players, including regulators. Okay, so we're using computers to mimic not just possibly some external factors, but other stuff, right? This sounds like people who work in markets to me, right? Banks, hedge funds, individuals, regulators. Seems like we're using computers, but again, we're not really being super direct yet, just exploring other fields of thinking. And then last sentence, it says these models are better because they do not assume equilibrium from the outset, but instead let market behavior emerge naturally from the actions of individual agents. So, right there, I feel like the first four words, and I already knew this was the most important sentence, right?
Yeah.
We had four words earlier. This is clearly unrealistic. Here's four words again. These models are better. That's like, if we thought of what we might want to map, that's pretty good. It's
Yeah.
unrealistic, the
Yeah.
equilibrium theory. There are other models and they're better.
Yeah, the two sentences in between those, right, were pretty good to help us transition. And I was
Yes,
expecting that transition. Like, okay, well, if that's unrealistic, then we'll maybe expand on why, which I already know why it's archaic, right? Or tell me what is better. And they did. They clearly say these models are better. And I still don't understand exactly what it means when it says individual agents, but to me, that kind of sounds like internal, right? Like I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is stuff that like is more detailed internally in the market that we can track, right? And so that's how I'm looking at it. But maybe this is different. Maybe this has nothing to do with external, internal. This has some totally different idea, right? But at least I know that this other model now also measures individual agents, which I think is the author's point here, why it's better.
yeah, yeah, I agree. It's more individualized. All right, let's transition into P5. Um, well, I guess before we leave P4, what do you think is the ultimate most important thing to get from that paragraph?
I think what they're saying is basically this old theory is unrealistic, that there are maybe some individual dynamics, and maybe it's called internal, I guess it's internal dynamics, and it's better. That's
Yeah,
it. That's it. It's really this individual way of looking at things might be better than this external viewpoint, only external, which is the equilibrium theory.
perfect. All right, let's see how P5 adjusts or builds on that argument. It says one potentially pertinent insight from such models is that too much easy credit can be a dangerous thing. Okay, so we're looking at insights from the models. So basically, something that we understand based on what those models show. Talking about too much easy credit. When I think credit, I think of like a credit card. Okay, but we need to see how that's being used here. It's an economics passage, so probably talking about like borrowing money. But let's see. Okay, kind of a broad sentence. Too much credit can be a dangerous thing. And that's something we learned from this model.
I mean, that
Next,
sounds like a reasonable thing, right? Like if you give
yeah,
too much,
I think so too.
you give too much money out, that might be bad because
Yeah.
then the people might spend it poorly. Okay, and that's
Mhm.
good that this model is able to track that. That I'm actually pretty impressed and confident about that. Okay.
Yeah, good point. As participants borrow ever larger sums of money to amplify the potential profit from their investments, their actions tie the fates of different participants even more closely together. Interesting. So it does sound like the too much easy credit comes from borrowing more and more and more money. As far as tying the fates of different participants closer together, this is something that I read and it kind of piques my interest and it makes me want to really reread and figure out, well, who are these different participants? Why are these people brought in or being brought closely together? I don't know that you necessarily need to sit here and fixate on it for a while. Um, but it does sound like borrowing large amounts of money is dangerous. Okay. It's maybe making things less secure.
I mean, it sounds greedy, right? Which I think is still
True.
a factor here. Greed causes this problem, and maybe this is a good way of identifying greed, right? A better way. This model might identify greed better, but okay,
Yeah,
cool.
that's a good point. That's a really good point. Last sentence here of P5. This pushes the market toward greater instability, making collective financial meltdown an almost inevitable consequence. Okay, so it's inevitable and it's unstable. Um, so in this case, we're talking about how borrowing too much money is creating instability, right? And meltdown. The fact that it's saying this makes collective financial meltdown an almost inevitable consequence is very, very extreme, right? It's almost inevitable that we have a meltdown if you follow this, right? Or if we borrow too much money.
Yeah.
So, borrowing too much money, it's very clearly bad for markets. It's very clearly a dangerous thing, and it makes meltdown almost inevitable. Pretty strong.
So we've been reading a lot of passages together every week, right?
Hmm.
And typically by now, the main idea is very obvious, right? Like usually by halfway through, we'll know what the idea is, and the rest of it will kind of, repeat the same idea over and over again, or kind of go into it a little bit more. If I was reading this on test day, I'd be a little nervous because
Yeah,
I wouldn't know what the main idea is yet, right?
yeah,
Like, is it the greed part? It's not the fact that there's an economic problem. That's not the main idea, right? That's just the theme of this passage. That's the topic of this passage. Um, the it's either going to be something to do with greed, right? Something to do with the old models suck,
yeah,
something to do with the new models are better, right? Or something to do with like the fact that too much borrowing or too much easy credit meaning easy way to get money, right? To borrow is bad, right? Those are the ideas that have been repeating or not repeating, but have been stated so far. And I'm thinking to myself, is there going to be another new idea that then ends up being repeated later on? Because like we're almost at the end. Like there's only three more paragraphs, and each of these paragraphs are only a couple sentences long. So I'm getting a little nervous. I'm a little nervous that I missed something that I wasn't able to catch the idea earlier because it could happen earlier, it could happen in the middle, maybe it happens at the end here, right? Which happens, but that's where my mind's at. I'm excited to see where this ends up going, right? What is the author's point? Because so far, if I had to guess, it would be greed, but I'm not sure yet, right? I'm not sure what the argument of the main argument of this passage is.
yeah. Very true. We'll see how it develops. Here in P6, it says individual agent-based models need improvement, but they are better than other models. Ask and you shall receive, Jack. Here's the sentence that shall or that sounds pretty familiar. We're talking about individual agent-based models, which sounds like what we were talking about earlier, the like computer-based models that take into account more internal factors, it seemed. They may need improvement, but they're better. We already said these individual agent-based models are better, right? In our discussion of why the equilibrium theory is weak. So that feels like an anchor. I don't know for sure if that's going to end up being our main idea, but now at least it's something that's repeated. And for me, especially given the discussion of equilibrium theory in P3 and then building on that, how that's limited and the alternative in P4, to see this pop up again in P6, I think that goes to the top of what I would consider to be, the front runner for the main idea.
Right. If you're in our program, you know any idea that repeats is part of your main idea. You could have more than one main idea. This is definitely a main idea, right? This idea that this model, this individual agent model, I'm guessing it's the internal model, right? That's how I'm characterizing it in my mind, is better than other models, is better than the equilibrium model. Okay, cool. At least now I have it like I'm sighing. I feel relieved, right? Because I know kind of like what the author cares about more. And why wouldn't they care about this? Why they brought it up multiple times, right? So this is obviously important to the author.
Agreed. Okay, already these models outperform traditional ones in predicting core market features, such as the statistics of daily or weekly price fluctuations. So they're better. Great. We got another sentence saying the same thing, right? The new models are better because they are more predictive, right? Since they take into account individual agents, not just these external factors. So what is this? P6? Yeah,
Six.
P6
Yeah,
is just a repetition of P4
that's it.
about this model being better.
Perfect.
All right. Let's look P7. And like you said, there are actually two more paragraphs. It's a high number of paragraphs, but they're all pretty short. P7 says it is odd then that most economists seem uninterested, and only a small minority have embraced the new approach. Oh, okay. So economists are not buying into this model. They're not interested. They kind of reject it, right? Okay. But to me, when I would read that, if I just saw most economists seem uninterested, I would be like, "Oh, wait, that's weird. Does that mean the author doesn't agree?" But it says it is odd that they aren't interested. The author still feels like this is the better option,
Yeah, that
right?
word odd, right? Like
Yeah,
even just because other people don't agree with it doesn't mean the author is changing their mind, right?
right.
The author here is making a grand stand saying, look, this is a better model. I mean, they've said that twice, even if these other economists don't agree with it, right? So great.
This hesitation appears to stem in large part from cultural inertia. All right. Inertia may not feel like an unfamiliar word for us physicists, at least if you've been studying physics for the MCAT. However, it's kind of an abstract concept here, cultural inertia. There's some idea that what's currently in motion wants to stay in motion. What's currently at rest wants to stay at rest. How does this apply to culture? Why does this apply to this hesitation about adopting this new economic theory, right? Like are we already like down one road and we don't want to turn around? Like how does this apply? Not super clear, pretty abstract. For me, Jack, I would keep reading.
I would. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's see what the next sentence says. While most of science is embracing the power of computer simulations to gain insights into complex systems with many interacting components, most economists remain dismissive of any work that is not based on strict mathematical proof. Okay, so they're kind of rejecting or they're unsure or uninterested about this mathematical, or sorry, the computer simulation. So they're not embracing it. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's same thing. This idea that economists are rejecting this new model. It's not different than what we've been saying. I think you can read more into it, but I don't think it's necessary. I think if you, as long as you know that other economists aren't necessarily jumping at this model, then you're fine.
Yeah, especially because we already have established in multiple paragraphs how the author feels about this model. So it's like, okay, economists don't agree. That doesn't change my thought about how the author feels about it.
Yep.
All right. P8, final paragraph. Although the present crisis was not caused by poor economic models, those models have extended its reach by nurturing the complacent view that markets are inherently stable. Okay, so again, we're clarifying this economic model that's poor, probably the equilibrium theory, didn't create the crisis. Again, like you said, the crisis, according to the author, was created by greed and not a lot of oversight, but this made it worse. Okay. So it's making it worse. Again, this is why the new models are better. The old models made things worse.
You know, it's interesting because we were talking about this economic crisis, and the author did say it's because of greed. But then we jumped into this idea of models somehow, right? Like we're talking about economic models, which is so abstract, so weird, so hard to understand. If you're just a pre-med student trying to take the MCAT, trying to become a doctor, why on earth are we having to worry about economic models and which one's better, right? I can sense that kind of frustration. But here's the thing, you never know what you're going to see as a doctor. And your job as a physician is going to be to keep an open mind, especially with different patients. So a patient could come to you one day and talk to you about this stuff. Are you going to just ignore them because you're a doctor? No, you're going to keep an open mind, listen to them, embrace their story. I think this is a great way to practice keeping an open perspective, open mind about things, right? And look at it as an opportunity for growth. Like we said, your Thanksgiving might actually be more informed when you go and talk to your aunts and uncles and cousins about the economy in the event that that ever happens. But yeah, just the key here is just get used to reading random things and being okay with it.
Absolutely. And find the fun in it, right? Like
Yeah.
it's kind of a fun, weird section that is going to give you basically 5 minutes of storytelling in something completely random and not relevant to what you're actually studying. You could see that as like a something that's like bothersome, or you recognize, even if I hate this, I only have to give it 5 minutes of my attention, right? Plus 5 minutes or so for the questions. You call it a day, right? Like it's kind of fun. You never know what you're going to see. You could be scared by that or frustrated by that, or you could find the fun in it. I
Yeah.
choose to find it fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we've established that the old models are not creating the problem, but are making it worse. And while no one should expect better models alone to prevent future crises, they may give regulators better ways to assess market dynamics, detect early signs of trouble, and police markets. Okay, so it sounds like we're kind of recapping the last couple paragraphs. The poor economic models made things worse. Now we're talking about the better models. It's not super concrete yet, but they have some advantages. And then the last sentence says the regulation of markets ought to be based on the very best science. And in this case, that means moving to agent-based models of economics. So that is very clear. And the author is saying this ought to be based on it. It's basically saying it should be, right? It should be based on the very best science. Ought to be is kind of an old way to phrase that, but it's the same meaning. It should be based on the very best science, right? It must be based on the very best science, which is the newer models that are agent based or individualized.
Exactly. Exactly. Great. And that, so basically this whole paragraph is a rehash of paragraph 4 and paragraph 6. Now, paragraph 7 was interesting because it did say that most economists reject this new model, but the author has been very confident about their point of view, right? And so now it's very clear what the main idea is. I'm excited to jump into the questions because I know what the author is trying to tell us. But I also understand that there might be some pushback and also there might be some other reasons why the economy could collapse, right? It's because of greed, right? Like that was brought up in one paragraph particularly. So yeah, just I think the key here is figure out the structure of the passage, figure out what the author really cares about, but also keep track of other things that the author mentioned.
Yeah. Absolutely. So we have our main idea. Again, we hope that each of you guys, after listening to this, we hope that you try the questions. There are actually 7 questions associated with this passage. So definitely, especially for this one, go get some practice. There's so much benefit that you can get out of doing the questions after listening to a podcast like this, right? Of course, we just went through sentence by sentence. So it's, even if the passage was a tough read to begin with, hopefully, right, our hope is that it makes more sense now and that you're more clear on what kind of arguments we should be tracking and how they developed throughout the passage. After these workshops, being able to go check out the questions, what you can infer and understand is how you perform on those questions is entirely dependent on how you're reading the question. Okay, because you understand the passage well. Normally, if you read a passage, you do your best with it, but you struggled and you get to the questions and you miss one, you have to really reflect, is it because I didn't understand the passage very well? Is it because my main idea or my map was not maybe entirely accurate? Or is it because something about this question is very difficult? The benefit here is you understand the passage well. Okay, so if you miss or struggle with the questions, it's probably because of the question itself. And you know that, and you can dive in deeper and get a really good learning opportunity out of it. So, again, if you have not, or if you're listening to this and it's not November 26th, find the link in the passage or in the description, and you can give this passage a try as well as the questions on your own. Best of luck to you. Have a happy holidays to all of you guys listening at and around the holiday season. And we hope you join us for our next Cars Reading Skills workshop. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you later.